Good evening, and welcome back to our quiet corner of Edwardian England, where the lamp is low and a place is kept for you by the fire. Tonight, we go to a small market town in Dorset in the misty golden autumn of 1906 on the week of the old Michaelmas fair. The square is full of striped stalls and lantern light, of gingerbread and lace, and among them stands the handwork stall of Susannah Merrick, a gentle woman of 47, who has always, shyly, hidden her finest work at the very back. But each morning, when Susannah lifts the canvas in the mist, she finds her most beautiful piece moved quietly to the front, set out in the best light. Who moves it, she cannot say. There is nothing here to solve, and nothing to fear. Only the far hum of the fair, and a beauty gently brought into the light. So rest your head, and dim your light. Tell us where you are listening from tonight. And if you would care to stay, do subscribe. Now, let us begin. The fair came to the town on the eve of Michaelmas, as it had come every year of Susannah Merrick's life, and every year of her mother's life before her, and she woke that morning to the first far sounds of it, and lay a while in the grey light, listening, glad. She could hear the vans coming in. That was always the first sign. The deep, slow rumble of the fair folks' wagons on the stone streets in the dark before the dawn, the creak and jingle of harness, the low voices of tired travellers who had come a long day's road from the last town, the whinny of a horse, the rattle of a tailboard let down. She lay in her small room over the shop, in the quiet side street off the square, and listened to the fair arriving, and felt the old childish gladness rise in her, as it had risen every Michaelmas morning for 47 years. For the fair was the great bright event of the year in that grey stone town, the one week when the quiet square filled with colour and light and music, and the whole town came out to walk among the stalls, and Susannah loved it, quietly and wholly, the way she loved few things in her careful, modest life. She rose and dressed by the cold window, and looked out at the town coming awake. The mist lay thick in the side street, soft and golden where the first light touched it, and the cobbles shone with the damp of the autumn morning, and there were leaves down now, the first of them gold and russet against the grey stone. It was Michaelmas weather, she thought, the true weather of the turning year, the mornings misty and cool, the days soft and golden, the evenings drawing in early and blue. She loved this weather too. She loved the smell of it, wood smoke and wet leaves and the last of the year, and she stood a while at the window in her shawl and breathed it in, and watched a fair wagon go by the end of the street, high and painted and slow, and was happy. Downstairs, in the little shop, she made her tea and cut her bread, and stood at the counter to eat it, among the quiet shelves of Strayed. It was a small shop, a draper's and fancy goods, her mother's shop before her, and her grandmother's before that. And Susannah had kept it alone for 3 years now, since her mother died, and kept it well, though she made little enough from it. The shelves held bolts of plain cloth and print, cards of buttons and reels of thread, papers of pins, ribbons on rolls, and, in the glass case by the window, the finer things. Her own lace, her own embroidery, the fancy work she made through the long, quiet evenings of the year, sitting by her lamp with her needle going, making beautiful things for a town that mostly wanted plain ones. The shop was full of her mother still, in the small ways that matter. The bell on the door that her mother had hung, the high stool her mother had sat on, the particular smell of the place, of cloth and beeswax and old paper, that had been the smell of Susannah's whole life. She had changed almost nothing in 3 years. It was not that she could not bear to. It was only that everything was already just as it should be, arranged by loving hands long before her own, and there seemed no call to alter what was already right. For Susannah was a maker. That was the truest thing about her, truer than shopkeeper, truer than spinster, truer than anything the town would have said of her. She made things. She had made things all her life, since her mother first put a needle in her small hand and showed her how. She knitted, and she embroidered, and she tatted lace, and she quilted. And in the autumn she put up jams and jellies from the hedgerows and the little garden behind the shop. And everything she made beautifully, with a patience and a fineness and a love that went far beyond anything the plain trade of the shop required. She could not help it. A thing worth making was worth making well. Her mother had always said, and Susannah had taken it into her very bones, so that she could no more knit a careless row or set a careless stitch than she could fly. And the long evenings of her solitary life went by, one after another, in the quiet making of beautiful things, and it was, though she would never have said so, a deep and real happiness to her. She undervalued her own work, and knew she did, and could not stop. When a customer admired a shawl she had laboured a month over, she would name a price so modest that Josiah Trescott, overhearing, would groan aloud. And when they praised her lace, she would blush and say it was nothing, only a bit of an old pattern, and turn the talk to something else. She did not know how to say, "I made this, and it is fine, and it is worth a fair price." The words would not come. They never had. And once a year, at Michaelmas, she took a stall at the fair and sold what she had made. It was the one time in all the year that her work went out into the world. Through the shop it trickled slowly, a collar here, a pot of jam there. But at the fair she took a proper stall, her mother's old stall in her mother's old pitch, under the striped canvas tilt her mother had sewn 30 years before, and Susannah still put up each year with her own hands. And she hung it and heaped it with the whole year's making, the shawls and the mufflers and the lace and the embroidered linen and the little cloth-capped pots of jam, and stood behind it for the week of the fair, and sold, and was, for that one bright week, not a quiet shopkeeper in a quiet street, but a part of the great, glad, bustling life of the fair, as her mother had been and her grandmother before her. She loved it more than she could say, and she dreaded it a little too. In the shy way she dreaded anything that put her forward. For to keep a stall is to stand up before the whole town and say, "Here, look, I made these." And Susannah had never in her life found it easy to say, "Look at me," or "Look what I have done." She had been a shy child, and she was a shy woman, and the modesty was bone deep. But she did it, for the love of the fair outweighed the shyness, and besides, it was what her mother had done. And to keep the stall was to keep her mother a little alive. She finished her tea and washed her cup and put on her good grey skirt and her cream shirtwaist with the little lace collar she had made herself, and her clean pin-tucked apron over it, and her knitted shawl about her shoulders against the morning chill. And she pinned her mother's thimble on its ribbon at her breast, as she always did on fair days, for luck and for company. And she took up the great basket of her handwork, packed and ready these 3 days past, and she went out into the misty golden morning to set up her stall. The square, when she came to it, was a wonderful confusion. The fair was going up all around, in the mist and the first sun, the stallmen hauling their trestles and their tilts, the roundabout being pieced together with a great ringing of iron and shouting, the gingerbread man firing his little oven, a woman driving a gaggle of geese into a hurdle pen, children already darting underfoot in the excitement of it, and over it all the fair folks' cheerful roughened calling, and the smell of wood smoke and gingerbread and trodden grass and horses. Susannah stood a moment at the edge of it, her basket on her arm, and let the gladness of it wash over her. It was the same every year, and every year it was new, the fair arriving, the grey square coming alive. Her pitch was where it always was, in the corner under the old chestnut tree, a good pitch, a corner pitch, that her mother had held for 30 years, and Susannah had held for 3, by the long unwritten right of the fair. And there, waiting for her as she came to it, was old Josiah Trescott, the gingerbread man, who had known her mother 40 years and had a soft spot for Susannah, setting a hand to her trestles to help her raise them. "Morning, Miss Merrick," he said, beaming his broad, flowery beam. "I got your poles out for ye. Thought I'd save your back." He was a great, round, comfortable old man, all grey whiskers and twinkling eyes and a permanent dusting of flour, and he had helped her set up her stall every year since her mother died, quietly, without being asked, the way the old fair folk looked after their own. Fine morning for it. Fine misty morning. The old fair's come again, eh? And here we all are. "Here we all are, Mr. Trescott," said Susannah, warmed as she always was by his kindness. "Thank you for the poles." "Ah, get on," he said comfortably, and helped her raise the striped tilt, her mother's tilt, over the trestles, and stood back to see it stand. "There, same as ever. I do like to see your mother's old stripes go up, Miss Merrick, I'll tell ye. It wouldn't be Michaelmas without 'em. She did love this fair, your mother. She was that alive at the fair." He shook his head, smiling into the past. "You're like her, you know, more than you think. Well, I'll leave you to your setting out. Mind you come by for a bit of gingerbread when you're straight." And he went back to his own stall and left her to it, and Susannah set to, in the misty golden corner under the chestnut tree, to lay out her stall. This was the part she loved best, the quiet, careful laying out, before the crowds came. She spread her cloth, and she brought out her handwork piece by piece from the basket, and she arranged it, taking her time, making it beautiful. The mufflers and the plain shawls to the front where they would sell, the pots of jam ranked in their rows with their cloth caps, the embroidered handkerchiefs fanned in their box, the lace pinned up where the light would catch it. She had a good eye, and she made her stall a pretty thing, a small bright island of colour and craft in the great rough bustle of the fair, and she was happy, laying it out in the misty morning, with the fair going up around her and Josiah's gingerbread smell drifting over, and the first sun burning through the mist. All around her, the other stalls were dressing too, and there was a fellowship in it, the quiet companionable work of the fair folk before the crowds. A called greeting here, a borrowed hammer there. The old Freemasonry of people who met once a year in town after town and knew one another well. Ottilie Vasi, who travelled with the roundabout, waved to her across the square from the top of a painted horse, bright kerchiefed and laughing, and Susannah waved shyly back, warmed to be known, to belong a little to this bright travelling world for 1 week of the year. And then, last of all, she came to the finest things. There were always a few, the pieces she had laboured over longest and loved most and made best. This year a shawl, a great fine gossamer thing of knitted lace, the finest she had ever made, 3 months of winter evenings in it, a cobweb of soft grey wool that you could pass through a wedding ring, and a christening gown, tucked and embroidered and edged with her own lace, a thing of such delicacy that she had hardly been able to bear to finish it, and a length of wide lace in her mother's own pattern, the pattern her mother had taught her, that she made a little of each year and never could quite bring herself to part with. These were the finest things, and these, as she always did, as her mother had always done, as she had been taught at her mother's knee. Susannah sat carefully at the back of the stall. She did it without quite thinking, the way you do a thing you have done all your life. The finest things went to the back. Partly it was modesty, the bone-deep shyness that could not bear to thrust her best work forward under the town's eye. Partly it was a kind of protectiveness, for the best things were the ones she could least bear to sell, and at the back, in the shadow, they were less likely to catch a buyer's eye. And partly it was simply what was done, what her mother had done, the way of it, unquestioned. The plain, good, sellable things to the front, the precious things, the heart's things, the things too fine and too loved to let go, safe at the back, in the shadow, half hidden, where only she quite knew they were. She set the gossamer shawl at the back, folded soft. She set the christening gown behind the jam pots. She set the lace in its tissue at the very back corner, where the chestnut's shadow fell, and she stood back and looked at her stall, bright and pretty and ready, with its plain things to the front and its treasures hidden behind. And she was content and did not think about it at all, for it was simply how her stall had always been, and how it always would be. The mist burned off. The sun came golden into the square. The fair finished going up, and the town began to come out, and the great glad week of the Michaelmas fair began. And Susannah Merrick stood behind her mother's stall, in her mother's pitch under the old chestnut tree, shy and warm and happy, and sold her mufflers and her jam to the folk of the town, and praised the work of the stalls on either side of her, far above her own, and slipped, whenever the stall was quiet, a shy glance back at her hidden treasures in the shadow, safe where no one would see them. And she thought, not for the first time, that she was a fortunate woman to have the fair and the making and the memory of her mother and the quiet good work of her hands, and she asked for nothing more. She could not have said, that first golden day, why her eye kept going back to the shawl at the back of the stall. It was only that she had loved making it so, only that it was the finest thing she had ever made, only that it seemed, somehow, a small quiet shame to have a thing so beautiful folded away in the shadow where no one in all the bright fair would ever see it. But that was where the finest things went. That was the way of it. And she put the small, odd feeling away, as she put so many things away gently at the back in the shadow. And she smiled at her next customer and weighed out a pot of blackberry jelly and let the first day of the fair carry her along. The evening came, blue and early, the way it did now at Michaelmas. The fair folk lit their lanterns and their naphtha flares, and the square filled with a soft gold hissing light, and the roundabout began to turn and wheeze its music, and the whole fair took on the warm magical glow that Susannah loved best of all. She sold a little more in the lantern light, and when the town went home to its supper and the fair grew quiet for the night, she packed away her jam pots and covered her stall with its canvas, leaving the handwork where it lay, safe under the tilt, to be uncovered again at dawn. And she left her treasures at the back, folded in the shadow, and went home through the misty, lantern-lit streets to her quiet rooms, tired and happy, with her mother's thimble on its ribbon at her breast, and slept. And in the dark, in the misty small hours before the dawn, in the empty lantern-lit square, something happened at Susannah Merrick's stall that she did not see and would not have believed and would find in the morning, with a wonder that would stay with her all the days of the fair and all the days of her life. She came to the stall in the misty dawn of the second day, and she saw it from across the square, and she stopped where she stood. The shawl was at the front, her shawl, the great gossamer lace shawl, the finest thing she had ever made, the 3 months of winter evenings, the cobweb of soft grey wool. It was not at the back where she had left it, folded soft in the shadow of the chestnut. It was at the front of the stall, at the very front and centre, spread out full and open where the whole world would see it first, draped over the plain mufflers, arranged with such care that the pale morning light fell through its open lacework and lit it from within, so that it seemed to float there, a grey mist made solid, the loveliest thing in all the waking fair. Susannah crossed the square to it slowly, in the mist, her heart beating in a way she did not quite understand. She had covered the stall herself the night before. She was quite certain of that. She had folded the shawl and set it at the back with her own hands, in the shadow, as she always did, as her mother had always done. And she had drawn the canvas down over the whole stall and gone home. And here it was, at dawn, uncovered, the shawl brought forward and spread and arranged in the best of the light, by hands that were not hers. She lifted the canvas, which had been raised already, folded neatly back. She stood before her own stall in the misty grey gold dawn, and looked at the shawl, spread full and beautiful at the front, and she waited, in her shy, quiet way, to feel afraid. And she found that she did not. The square was empty around her. It was very early, earlier than the fair woke. The other stalls stood shut and shrouded in their canvas, the roundabout still and dark, the ashes cold in Josiah's oven, the geese asleep in their pen with their heads under their wings. There was no one. There had been no one all the misty night, but the sleeping fair. And yet the shawl was at the front, spread and lit and lovely, arranged with a care and a love that was almost, she thought, greater than her own. Arranged as she herself, for all her good eye, would never quite have dared to arrange it. Arranged by someone who thought her shawl the most beautiful thing in the world and wanted the world to see it. Susannah stood a long time before her stall in the empty, misty dawn, and what she felt was not fear at all. It was something she had no name for, something warm and old and deep, something that made her throat ache and her eyes prick, though she was not sad. Something that felt, more than anything else, like being seen. All her life, she had hidden her best work at the back, in the shadow, where no one would see it. And here was someone, in the dark before the dawn, gently, lovingly, taking it out of the shadow and setting it in the light, as if to say, "No, not this one. This one is too beautiful to hide. Let it be seen." She did not take it back to the shadow. That was the thing she noticed about herself, standing there, that her hands did not move of their own habit to fold the shawl and carry it to the back. She looked at it, spread and lovely at the front of the stall, and she found that she could not bring herself to hide it again. Someone had thought it worth the light, and looking at it now, in the light, she thought so too. It was beautiful. She had made it, and it was beautiful. And for once in her life, the knowledge did not shame her, but warmed her, standing alone in the misty dawn before her mother's stall, with her own best work shining at the front where someone unseen had lovingly put it. She left it there. She uncovered the rest of her stall and set out her jam pots and made all ready for the day, and she left the great shawl spread full and open at the front in the best of the light and did not hide it. And when Josiah Trescott came by with a fresh tray of gingerbread, warm from his oven, and stopped and stared and said, "Well, now, Miss Merrick, will ye look at that? I never saw the like. That's the finest bit of work in the whole fair, and no mistake." Susannah did not blush and murmur that it was nothing. She looked at the shawl, and she looked at old Josiah, and she said quietly, "Thank you, Mr. Trescott. I made it this winter." And that was all. But for Susannah Merrick, it was a very great deal, for it was the first time in her whole life that she had let a piece of her best work stand in the light and heard it praised and simply said, "Thank you." She did not tell Josiah how the shawl had come to the front. She could not, quite, any more than she had ever been able to say, "Look at me." And besides, what was there to tell? That she had left it at the back and found it at the front. He would say she had misremembered. Anyone would say she had misremembered. And perhaps, she told herself, in the sensible daylight, she had. Perhaps she had set it at the front after all, in the bustle of the evening, and forgotten. But she knew she had not. She knew her own habits, the habits of a lifetime. The finest things went to the back. She had not put the shawl at the front. Someone else had. And she found, turning it over in her mind through the busy golden day, that she did not want to know who, and did not want to catch them, and did not want the sweet, strange kindness of it explained away into an ordinary thing. She wanted only to leave the shawl in the light and let it be seen as someone in the dark had wished it to be seen. And the shawl in the light was seen. All that second day, the folk of the fair stopped at Susannah's stall to look at it, to exclaim over it, to finger its gossamer softness and hold it up to the light and marvel. And Susannah stood behind her stall, shy still, but glowing quietly, and let them look, and told them, when they asked, that yes, she had made it this winter of an evening, and did not once take it to the back. She sold a great deal that day, more than she ever had on a second day, for the shawl drew people to the stall, the way a lit window draws you on a dark road. And once they had come for the shawl, they stayed for the mufflers and the jam. But she did not sell the shawl. When a stout, prosperous farmer's wife offered her a good price for it, a very good price, Susannah found herself saying, gently, that this one was not for sale. And the woman huffed and bought 2 mufflers instead and went away. And Susannah looked at the shawl, still shining at the front of her stall, and was glad, obscurely, that it had not gone. The fair went on, and the days went by, and each dawn it happened again. Each morning, Susannah came to her stall in the misty early light, before the fair woke, and each morning she found that in the night, by hands she never saw, another of her hidden treasures had been brought gently forward into the light. The second morning, the shawl. The third morning, the christening gown, taken from behind the jam pots and hung up full and open at the front of the stall, tucked and embroidered and edged with her lace, so fine and so white and so delicate that it stopped the breath. A thing made for a child not yet born, or perhaps for no child at all, only for the love of making something perfect. She had made it, if she were honest, for a child she had once thought she might have, in the years when she was young, and it still seemed possible. And when those years went by, and the child did not come, she had gone on making it anyway. Slowly, a few stitches of a winter evening, not for any christening, but simply because it was beautiful, and because her hands needed beautiful work to do. It was the most private thing she owned, and it hung there at the front in the misty dawn, and Susannah stood before it and did not take it down. The fourth morning, the wide lace in her mother's pattern, unrolled from its tissue and pinned up along the whole front of the tilt, a yard and more of it, the pattern her mother had taught her, spread out for all the fair to see. And each morning it was the same, the finest thing, the most hidden thing, the thing she loved best and had tucked most carefully into the shadow, brought forward in the night and set in the light, arranged with that same unmistakable love, as though someone went through her stall in the dark and found, unerringly, the very piece she treasured most and would not let it stay hidden. And the fair went on around this small daily wonder, warm and ordinary and unknowing. The roundabout wheezed its 3 tunes over and over. The geese complained in their pen. Josiah's gingerbread came golden from the oven, tray after tray, and the smell of it hung over the whole square. Children spent their Michaelmas farthings on toffee and tin whistles. The town came and went in its Sunday best, and bought and gossiped and moved on, and none of them knew that at the corner stall under the chestnut, a quiet woman was being gently, nightly, taught to see her own worth. It was a secret between Susannah and the dark, and she carried it through the bright days like a warm coal held in the hand. She grew used to it as the days went by, in the way one grows used to a wonder. She stopped a little, being amazed by it, and began, instead, simply to look forward to it, to wake each fair morning with a small, quiet eagerness, wondering what she would find at the front today, which of her treasures would be waiting for her in the light. It was, she thought, walking to the square each misty dawn, the strangest and sweetest thing that had ever happened to her. And it was changing her, gently, day by day, in a way she felt but could not have named. For a woman who has hidden her best self at the back all her life, in the shadow, does not easily believe it beautiful. And here was someone, patiently, morning after morning, insisting that she was, taking her hidden beauty out of the dark and setting it in the light over and over, until slowly, shyly, against all the long habit of her modesty, Susannah began, just a little, to believe it too. Vasi noticed the change, as travelling people notice things. She came to the stall on the 5th day, in a lull, bright kerchiefed and quick-eyed, with her gold hoops swinging, and looked at the lace pinned up along the tilt, and the shawl at the front, and the christening gown, and looked at Susannah, and said, in her warm, brisk way, "You've come out, Miss Merrick, this year. I don't know what it is, but you've come out. All these years you've hid your light, and this year, look, you've hung it all up in the sun where a body can see it. And quite right too. It's the best work in the fair, and everyone's saying so. I always said it was, but you never would have it." She grinned and touched the gossamer shawl with a brown ringed finger. "Whatever's got into you this Michaelmas, my dear, you keep hold of it." "I don't rightly know what's got into me," said Susannah, and it was true. And Ottilie laughed and said that was the best way, not to know, and to enjoy it while it lasted, and went back to her roundabout. And Susannah stood among her handwork spread bright in the sun, and thought about what Ottilie had said, that she had come out, that she had hung her light up where a body could see it. It was true. She had. Though it was not she who had first hung it up. It was the hands in the dark. But once they had shown her the way, morning after morning, she had let it stay, and that, perhaps, was her own doing, after all, the letting it stay. And there was a kind of courage in it that she had not known she had, and that pleased her, quietly, more than she could say. Wesley Crabb, the freckled town boy who helped her at the stall for a few pennies, and all the gingerbread he could eat, noticed nothing, being 15 and interested chiefly in the roundabout and the coconut shy. But he was a good boy, willing and quick, and he fetched and carried for her all through the fair, and minded the stall when she stepped away, and Susannah was fond of him. On the 5th evening, as they packed away by lantern light, he looked at the shawl which she was folding to lay at the back for the night, and said, with a boy's blunt kindness, "That's ever so pretty. That is, Miss Merrick. You didn't ought to put it away. It looks best out front." And Susannah, folding the shawl, stopped and looked at it, and thought, out of the mouths of babes. And she did a thing she had never done in all her years of the fair. It was a small thing to leave a shawl at the front of a stall overnight. It would have seemed nothing at all to Wesley, or to Ottilie, or to almost anyone in the world. But to Susannah, who had hidden her best work at the back for 47 years, it was very nearly a revolution, and she felt it as such, a small, quiet turning over of something deep and old, and she was frightened and glad in about equal measure, and could not have said which was the greater. She did not put the shawl at the back. She left it at the front, spread full and open on the stall, under the covering canvas, ready in its place for the morning. She left her best work in the light of her own hands for the first time, and she covered the stall and said good night to Wesley, and walked home through the lantern-lit mist, and thought about it all the way, half amazed at herself. And she wondered, climbing the stairs to her quiet rooms, whether the hands in the dark would come tonight, and find the shawl already at the front where they had wanted it, and be glad. She lay awake a while, that fifth night, which was not like her, thinking of the stall in the dark square, and the shawl spread ready in the light, and whatever it was that came in the small hours and honoured her work. And she was not afraid, lying there in the dark, but full of a soft and wondering gladness, and a question she did not try too hard to answer. For she had begun to think, in these last days, without letting the thought quite form, of whose hands might know her stall so well, of whose love might go so unerringly to the finest, most hidden thing, of who, in all the world, had first taught her to make beautiful things, and then taught her, too, to hide them at the back. But she did not finish the thought. She only held it, gently, in the dark, the way she held all the sweetest and strangest things. And she slept, at last, and did not dream, or dreamed only of lace spread white in the morning light. And in the misty dark of the fifth night, in the empty lantern-lit square, whatever came to Susannah Merrick's stall found the great grey shawl already spread at the front, in the light, where it belonged. And what it did then, if it did anything, she never knew. She knew only that when she came in, the sixth dawn, the shawl was still at the front, just as she had left it. And beside it, drawn forward from the very back of the stall, from a corner she had forgotten she had filled, was one more thing, the last and the least, and in its way, the dearest of all her treasures, waiting for her in the pale gold light. And at the sight of it, her breath caught and her eyes filled, and she understood all at once and passed, all doubting, a little more of what was happening at her stall in the dark. The thing at the front of the stall, that sixth misty dawn, was a small square of embroidered linen, old and a little faded, that Susannah had not made. Her mother had made it. It was a sampler of a kind, though not the schoolroom sort. A small square of fine linen worked all over, in silks gone soft with age, with a border of flowers, and, in the centre, a little house with a chestnut tree beside it, and a market cross, and two small figures standing at a stall beneath the tree, a woman and a child. And Susannah knew it at a glance, for it had hung in the shop parlour all through her childhood, her mother's own work, made in the first year of her mother's own married life. A picture of this very square, this very fair, this very pitch under the chestnut. Her mother had worked herself and her own mother into it, the woman and the child at the stall, And one day, when Susannah was small, her mother had unpicked the child and worked it again a little larger, and told her, laughing, that now it was Susannah at the stall, that she had put her into the picture, that she belonged there under the chestnut with all the Merrick women before her. She had loved that sampler as a child beyond all reason. She should stand before it in the shop parlour on winter evenings and find herself in it, the small stitched child at the stall, and feel a deep contentment at being there, worked into the picture, part of the fair and the family and the long line of it. It had made her feel that she belonged somewhere, which is perhaps the thing a child most needs to feel, and she had never quite lost the feeling, even grown, even alone, that somewhere under a stitched chestnut tree there was a place kept for her, and always would be. Susannah had thought the sampler lost. She had not seen it in years, not since before her mother died. She had assumed it packed away in some trunk, or given off, or gone the way of small old things. She had certainly not brought it to the fair. It had no business at the fair. It was not for sale, could never be for sale, was the last thing in the world she would have set out on a stall. And yet here it was, at the front of her stall in the 6th dawn, propped gently against the shawl, in the best of the pale gold light. The little embroidered house and chestnut and cross and stall, the woman and the child, her mother's own hands' work, brought out of some deep forgotten corner of her packing and set before her where she could not fail to see it. She stood before it a long time in the misty, empty dawn, and the tears came, and she let them. Not the tears of grief, but the other kind, the kind that come when something long locked opens gently in the heart. For she understood now. She had half understood for days and would not let herself finish the thought. But the sampler finished it for her, past all doubting. Only one person in all the world had known where that sampler was. Only one person had ever loved Susannah's work so, or known her stall so, or gone so unerringly to the finest and most hidden thing. Only one person had taught her, at this very pitch, to make beautiful things, and had taught her, too, out of her own shy modesty, to hide them at the back, and might, perhaps, having learned better herself somewhere beyond the reach of Susannah's knowing, have come back in the misty small hours of the Michaelmas fair to teach her child the last and best lesson, the one she had never taught her living, that beautiful things are meant to be seen. For her mother had been shy too. That was the truth of it, that Susannah saw clearly now, sitting with the understanding. Her mother had hidden her own best work at the back all her life, exactly as she had taught Susannah to do, and had never quite believed in her own beauty, and had gone to her grave, perhaps, not knowing how fine her hands had been. And it was as though, knowing better now, she could not bear to let her daughter make the same long, modest mistake, could not bear to let Susannah spend another 47 years hiding her light at the back, and had come in the only way left to her, to take it gently out of the shadow, night after night, and hold it up and say, "Look, look what you made. It is beautiful. Let it be seen." Susannah did not say the word, even to herself, even then. She did not need to. She only stood before her mother's sampler at the front of the stall in the grey gold dawn, and let the tears run, and let the understanding fill her warm and complete and past all fear. And then she wiped her eyes with the back of her thread-worn hand, and she reached out, and she did not take the sampler away. She left it at the front, propped against the shawl in the light where her mother had put it, and she made ready her stall for the day. She could not settle that sixth day. The understanding was too large and too tender to carry quietly through an ordinary day of trade. And so, in the middle of the morning, when the fair was busy and Wesley could mind the stall, she slipped away on a sudden need she did not quite examine, to the far side of the square, to the old pitch. There was an old pitch. Every fair has its old ground. The corner where the fair first stood, in the years before it spread. And in this town, it was a quiet cobbled corner behind the market cross, out of the main bustle, where in the old days the cheese women and the lace women had set their pitches, and where, when Susannah was a very small child, her mother and her grandmother had kept their stall before the good corner under the chestnut came to them. Susannah had not been to the old pitch in years. There was no reason to go. It was a backwater now, the fair having grown away from it. A quiet corner where a few old country women still sold eggs and cheese and bunches of herbs from baskets, in the old way, under no tilt at all. But she went to it now, that sixth morning, drawn by something she did not name, and she stood in this quiet cobbled corner behind the cross, a little apart from the roar of the fair, and looked at the place where her mother's stall had once stood, and remembered. She could see it, almost. A small child, herself, 4 or 5 years old, sitting on an upturned box under her grandmother's stall in this very corner, out of the way, playing with a reel of thread, while above her the women worked and sold and gossiped. The great forest of grown-up skirts and the trestle legs and the baskets, the smell of cheese and herbs and her mother's lavender, the safe enclosed under the stall world of a fair child, roofed over with trestle and cloth, lit at the edges with the gold of the fair, loud overhead with grown-up voices and laughter and the chink of coins. She had had her own small kingdom down there, among the box corners and the basket feet, and had been perfectly happy in it for whole long days, needing nothing but the knowledge that her mother's skirts were just there, and her mother's hands just above, and the great warm fair going on all round. She could remember her mother's hands coming down to her with a bit of gingerbread or a length of ribbon to play with, or to lift her up and show her something over the edge of the stall. She could remember being happy in a deep, wordless animal way, safe under the stall in the middle of the great bright fair, with her mother above her. And she stood in the quiet corner now, a woman of 47, and remembered the child she had been, and her mother young and alive, and quick-handed above her, and was filled with a tenderness so great it was almost more than she could hold. And there, in the quiet corner, against the old grey wall behind the market cross, half forgotten, was a bench, a plain old stone bench, worn smooth, where the market women had always rested. And Susannah went to it and sat down on the old cold stone, in the quiet a little apart from the fair, and she found that she was not alone in her remembering, for someone had been there. On the end of the bench, in the corner, sheltered from the weather by the overhang of the old wall, lay a few small things arranged with care. A worn wooden sewing box, its lid a little lifted, and beside it a reel of soft grey wool, the very wool of the gossamer shawl, and a paper of pins, and a small pair of scissors in the shape of a stork that Susannah knew that had been her mother's, that she had thought lost with the sampler. They lay on the end of the old bench in the quiet corner, in the shelter of the wall, as though someone had sat there lately, in the small hours, and worked a little, and set her things down and gone, as though the old pitch, the first pitch, the pitch of the grandmother and the mother and the child, were still, somehow, kept and used and loved in the misty dark when the fair slept. Susannah looked at the little things a long time and did not touch them. She understood that she must not, that these were not relics, not a sad museum, but something living. The small, ordinary belongings of someone who still came here, still sat here in the quiet dark, still worked a little at the old pitch where it all began. The sewing box was her mother's, the box her mother had taught her from, the box that had sat between them 1,000 evenings while her mother guided her small hands. The stork scissors were her mother's. The grey wool was the wool of the shawl that had come to the front of the stall in the dark. And they lay here on the old bench in the first corner, kept and used and ready, as though the long line of the Merrick women, the grandmother and the mother, had never quite left the fair at all, as though they still kept a pitch here in the quiet, out of the way, and came to it in the dark and worked and watched over the child, now grown, who kept the good corner under the chestnut and had only lately learned to let her beauty be seen. Susannah sat on the old stone bench in the quiet corner, with her mother's sewing box beside her, and she did not weep now, for she was past weeping into something calmer and deeper and sweeter. And she looked out from the old pitch across the whole roaring, bright bustle of the fair, the stalls and the tilts and the turning roundabout and the crowds, the whole great, glad, living Michaelmas fair. And she thought of all the women who had stood at Merrick stalls in this square, back and back, her grandmother and her mother and herself, a long line of quick-handed makers, each teaching the next, each keeping the fair, each making beautiful things through the long, quiet years, and bringing them here once a year to the bright square to be seen. She was one of that line. She was not the last of it, she hoped, though there was no child of hers to come after. But perhaps, she thought, the line was not only of blood. Perhaps young Wesley or some other would take it up. Perhaps beautiful making did not die with a family, but passed somehow from hand to hand down the years, kept alive by whoever loved it enough. And there was a great comfort in that, sitting on the old bench where it had all begun. She thought of young Wesley, who could not sew a stitch and cared only for the roundabout, and smiled. And yet, she thought, the boy had said the truest thing of anyone. It looks best out front, and perhaps that was a kind of inheritance too. The plain good eye that knows a beautiful thing should be seen. Perhaps she would teach him something yet before the fair was done. Perhaps the line ran on in ways she could not see, hand to willing hand, as long as there were people who loved to make and to give. She did not take her mother's things. She left them exactly as she had found them, The sewing box with its lifted lid, the grey wool, the pins, the little stalk scissors on the end of the old bench in the shelter of the wall, kept and ready for whoever came to them in the dark. She would no more have taken them than she would have taken the shawl from the front of the stall and hidden it again at the back. Some things you leave exactly as you find them. Some kindnesses you receive with both hands and do not question. And she rose at last from the old cold stone and stood a moment in the quiet corner and said softly to the sewing box, to the bench, to the whole quiet remembering corner, "Thank you, Mother. I understand now. I won't hide them any more." And then she went back across the bright roaring square to her own stall under the chestnut, to her own good pitch, to her own beautiful work spread shining in the light where it belonged. She was quiet the rest of that day, but it was a full quiet, a brimming quiet, not a sad one. She stood behind her stall, with her mother's sampler propped at the front, and the gossamer shawl beside it, and all her treasures spread bright in the autumn sun. And she sold her plain things, and let people marvel at her fine ones, and said thank you simply when they praised her. And every little while her eye went to the sampler, the little embroidered house and chestnut and cross and stall, the woman and the child, and she was glad past saying that it had come back to her out of the dark, and that she understood at last what it meant. The days of the fair drew on toward their end. There were 2 days left now, then 1, and Susannah found, as the end came near, that a change was working in her, quietly, alongside all the wonder. For she had begun to think, looking at her treasures spread in the light, that it was not enough, after all, only to let them be seen. A beautiful thing that is seen, and then packed away again, at the end of the fair, back into the shop, back into the shadow, is only half finished still. Her mother had taught her, these misty mornings, to bring her beauty into the light. But there was a further lesson coming. Susannah felt, a last one, that she was only beginning to understand. And it had to do with the giving of beautiful things, and with the difference between keeping a thing safe and letting it go out into the world to be loved. And she turned it over in her mind, that 7th evening, packing away by lantern light, with her mother's sampler held gently in her hands, and did not quite reach the end of it, but felt it coming, warm and large and near, like the last light before the dark. She looked, that evening, at the christening gown, the gown she had made for a child who never came, and had kept all these years wrapped in tissue, too precious and too private to sell or to give. And she thought, for the first time, of a young woman she had seen at the fair that very day, pale and tired and near her time, in a thin, worn coat, with no money for fine things, and a baby coming into a hard winter. And something turned over gently in Susannah's heart. And she did not finish the thought, but she did not put it away either. She let it stay, the way she was learning to let things stay, out in the light, where she could look at it. The last day of the fair came, bright and golden, and a little sad, the way last days are, and Susannah woke to it, knowing what she meant to do. She had lain awake in the night, not troubled, but full, turning over the thought that had come to her at the stall, the thought about the giving of beautiful things. And somewhere in the small hours, it had come clear to her, whole and simple and right, and she had smiled in the dark and gone to sleep. She knew now. Her mother had spent a week of misty mornings teaching her the first half of the lesson, that beautiful things are meant to be seen. And Susannah had learned it and let her treasures stand in the light. But there was a second half, and her mother had left it wisely for Susannah to find herself, that beautiful things are meant, in the end, to be given, that a made thing reaches its true home, not on a stall, however well lit, but in the hands and the life of someone who needs its beauty, and that to keep a lovely thing forever, safe, unsold, ungiven, however much you love it, is only a gentler kind of hiding it at the back. She dressed and pinned her mother's thimble at her breast and went out into the last misty golden morning and came to her stall, and there, at the front, waiting for her in the pale dawn light, was the last treasure of all. She had wondered what it would be. Every morning of the fair, a hidden thing had come forward. The shawl, the christening gown, the lace, the sampler. And she had thought, walking to the square, that surely there was nothing left, that she had no more hidden things. But her mother had found one more. There, at the very front and centre of the stall, spread out in the best of the light, was a small worked picture, a thing Susannah had made long ago and never shown to a soul, a little embroidered square in answer to her mother's sampler that she had stitched in the year after her mother died, alone of an evening, to comfort herself. And it showed the same house and chestnut and cross and stall, the same square, the same fair, but with 3 small figures now at the stall beneath the tree, a grandmother, a mother, and a child grown to a woman. The whole long line of them, together, at the pitch under the chestnut, worked in Susannah's own fine hand, in the silks her mother had left her. She had made it in her grief and looked at it once and wrapped it away, too tender to bear, at the very back of the very deepest drawer. And here it was, at the front of the stall, in the light, the last hidden thing brought forward by the hands in the dark. Susannah stood before it in the misty dawn, and she did not weep, though her heart was full, for she understood that this was the last morning, that the lesson was complete, that her mother had brought forward the last and deepest hidden thing of all, and there was nothing left now at the back to bring. And she understood, too, that the time had come for the second half of the lesson, the giving, and she was ready. She made her stall ready for the last day, and she set the little 3-figure picture at the front beside her mother's sampler. The 2 of them together, the mother's work and the daughter's, the long line complete. And then she set about, quietly, and with a full glad heart, to give her treasures away. She did not sell them. That was the whole point, and she understood it perfectly now. They were not to be sold, for a thing sold goes to whoever has the most money, and that is not the same as whoever most needs its beauty. They were to be given, each to the right person, the person her mother's stall had somehow been gathering toward it all the week long. And so, all through that last bright golden day of the fair, Susannah Merrick gave away the finest work of her hands. She gave the christening gown first, The pale young woman was at the fair again, the tired one near her time in the thin worn coat, standing a little wistfully at the edge of the crowd, watching the roundabout. She could not spare a farthing to ride. And Susannah went to her, shy but sure, with the christening gown wrapped in its tissue, and put it into her arms, and said simply that it was a gift for the baby from one who had no baby to give it to, and would she please take it? It would be a kindness. And the young woman's face, when she understood, when she unfolded the tissue and saw the fineness of the little gown, the tucks and the embroidery and the lace, was a thing Susannah would keep in her heart for the rest of her life. The disbelief, and then the tears, and then the shy, radiant joy of it. And she tried to say she could not. It was too fine, too much. And Susannah folded the girl's hands over it and said, "No, it is exactly right. It was made for you and yours, and only waited all these years for me to find you." And the young woman went away through the fair, holding the gown to her breast like a warm coal. And Susannah stood and watched her go, and was happier than she had ever been in her life. She had made that gown for a child of her own, in the years when she still hoped for one, and had grieved a little every time she looked at it, for the child who never came. And now, giving it away to a stranger's baby, she found that the old small grief was gone, quite gone, dissolved into this greater gladness, as though the gown had only ever been waiting to find the child it was truly for. Nothing she had made was wasted after all. It had only been waiting. She gave the great gossamer shawl to old Miss Honoria Pledge, the retired schoolmistress who came to the stall every year of her life to buy a little lace and remember Susannah's mother, and who was old now, and thin, and alone, and felt the cold. Miss Pledge had admired the shawl all week, in her precise, dry way, standing before it and saying that it was very fine work. "Very fine indeed, Miss Merrick, quite in your mother's manner." And on this last day, Susannah took it down, the cobweb of soft grey wool, the finest thing she had ever made, and folded it about the old schoolmistress's thin shoulders, and said it was hers, a gift for all the years of her kindness and her custom and her remembering. And Miss Pledge, who had taught the town's children for 40 years, and never married, and never, perhaps, been given a beautiful thing in all her upright life, stood very still under the soft grey shawl, and her sharp old eyes filled behind her spectacles, and she said, after a while, in a voice not quite her own, that she did not know what to say, that it was too generous, that she had never had anything so lovely. And Susannah said only that it suited her, and that her mother would have wished it, and that a shawl was for keeping the cold off, not for keeping in a drawer. And old Miss Pledge went away through the fair, wrapped in grey gossamer, walking a little taller, warm for the coming winter. And Susannah watched her go, and was glad. It was a strange thing, she thought, watching the old schoolmistress go, how much lighter the giving felt than the selling had ever done. All her life she had parted with her plain work for pennies, and felt the small cold pinch of the bargain, the weighing of worth against coin. And here she was, giving away her very finest things for nothing at all, and feeling, instead of loss, a warmth that spread right through her, as though every gift given away came back to her doubled in the face of the one who received it. She had never known that. Her mother had known it, perhaps, at the last. She knew it now, and so it went, all through the last golden day. The wide lace in her mother's pattern she gave to Ottilie Vase, the roundabout woman who had been so warm to her, so glad of her coming out, and who fingered the lace with such open, frank longing that there was nothing to do but press it into her brown-ringed hands. And Ottilie, who was not a woman easily silenced, was silenced and hugged Susannah hard and called her a wonder and wore the lace at her throat for the rest of the fair. The embroidered handkerchiefs she gave to the children who had spent all week at her stall edge, one apiece to their astonishment. A muffler she gave to Wesley Crabbe, a fine warm one for the winter, for all his willing help. And the boy went scarlet and mumbled and was more pleased than he could say. And to old Josiah Trescott, who had raised her stall every year and looked after her like a daughter, she gave the thing she thought he would like best, a great pot of her finest quince preserve, and a promise to come by his oven for gingerbread the moment the fair was struck. By the blue and lantern-lit evening of that last day, Susannah Merrick's stall stood nearly bare of its treasures. The shawl was gone to warm an old woman. The christening gown was gone to a child not yet born. The lace was gone, and the handkerchiefs, and the finest of the mufflers, all given, all gone out into the world, and the lives of the folk who needed their beauty, exactly as her mother had, at the very last, been trying to teach her. And Susannah stood behind her nearly bare stall in the soft gold hissing lantern light, tired to the bone and lit from within, and looked at the two small worked pictures still propped at the front, the only treasures she had kept, her mother's sampler and her own answer to it, the long line of the Merrick women together under the stitched chestnut tree. And she was not sad that the fair was ending, and not sad that her treasures were gone, but filled instead with the deepest and completest gladness she had ever known. For she understood the whole of the lesson now. She had spent her life making beautiful things and hiding them at the back, safe and unseen and ungiven, out of a modesty she had thought was humility, and saw now was only a kind of fear. And in 1 week of misty mornings, her mother had led her all the way out of it, gently, night by night, treasure by treasure, had taught her first to let her beauty be seen and then to let it be given, had taught her that a made thing is not truly finished until it is out in the light and out in the world, and warming some life that needs it, and that this, and not the safe drawer, and not the shadowed back of the stall, is what beautiful things and the hands that make them are for. And she thought, standing among the last of her given-away treasures, that her mother had chosen her gifts as carefully as she had chosen the treasures to bring forward. That all week long the stall had been quietly gathering toward this, drawing to it the cold old woman and the poor young mother and the warm-hearted travelling woman, each to meet the very thing that was waiting for them, and that she, Susannah, had only had to open her hands at the last and let it happen. It was the easiest thing in the world once you saw it. It was only the seeing that had taken her 47 years. She did not go to the old pitch again that last evening. She thought of it in the lantern light. She thought of going to the quiet corner behind the cross, to the old stone bench to say goodbye, to say thank you, to see whether her mother's sewing box still lay there in the shelter of the wall. But she found she did not need to. She understood that the thing was complete, that the lesson was fully given and fully learned, and that there would be no treasure at the front tomorrow. No small things kept on the old bench, because there was no more to teach and no more to bring forward. The finest things were all out in the light, and the world now given away, being loved, which is where they belonged, and the hands in the dark could rest. She packed away her nearly bare stall for the last time, in the blue lantern-lit evening with Wesley's help, and she folded the striped tilt, her mother's tilt, and she took down the trestles, and she wrapped the two small pictures, the sampler and its answer, with great care to carry home, the only treasures she had kept and the only ones she needed. And she stood a last moment in the emptying square, under the old chestnut, with the fair going dark around her, and the lanterns going out one by one, and the last late leaves coming down. And she looked at the pitch, her mother's pitch, her grandmother's pitch, and she said softly into the blue autumn dark, "Good night, Mother, and thank you. I'll not hide them any more. I'll let them be seen, and I'll let them go. I promise you that." And then she took up her basket, light now, so light, and walked home through the misty lantern-lit streets to her quiet rooms, with her mother's thimble on its ribbon at her breast. And she was, in the deepest and quietest and most complete way, at peace. And now the fair is over, and the square is quiet, and the last of the lanterns has gone out, and a soft mist is stealing back across the cobbles under the old chestnut tree, where a woman stood tonight and let her beautiful things go out into the world at last. There is nothing left to do now. The treasures are given. The shawl is warming an old woman by her winter fire. The little gown is folded away, waiting for a child not yet born. The lace is at a traveller's throat, going on down the road to the next town and the next. All the beautiful things that were hidden so long at the back in the shadow are out in the light, and the world now being loved, which is what they were always for. You need not hide anything away tonight. Whatever lovely thing you have made, or done, or been, that you have kept quiet and folded small and tucked at the back where no one would see it, let it be seen. It is finer than you know. Someone, somewhere in the dark, has always known how fine it was. Think, if you like, of Susannah, of her nearly empty stall and her full and quiet heart, of the two small pictures she kept, the mother's work and the daughter's, the long line of loving hands together under the stitched tree, of the misty mornings and the treasures brought gently into the light, one by hands she never saw and never needed to see. There is no mystery here that needs solving tonight. Some things are not questions to be answered. They are only love, going on quietly in the work of the hands it once guided, taking our hidden beauty out of the shadow, morning after morning, and holding it up to the light and saying, "Look, look what you made. 'Tis beautiful. Let it be seen." So let the last lantern gently go out. Let the mist come soft across the empty square. Let the old chestnut drop its last leaves into the quiet, and the fair sleep, and the town sleep, and all the given gifts settle warm into the lives that needed them. You have made lovely things, and you are one of them. You may set your work down now and be seen and rest. Sleep softly, dear one. Whatever you have hidden away, and however long you have hidden it, it was always beautiful, and you were never as alone as you believed. Close your eyes and let the morning bring what it will. Good night.